Whilst my last video dealt with some of the more virtuous deeds of the Autobots, the truth is they're not exactly squeaky clean. Far, far from it. Let me just get some of that blood for you there, Impactor. And sometimes you can see how this happens. I mean, faced with the levels of evil that the Decepticons can inflict, after that fog of war descends, it's easy to see how sometimes lines are going to get crossed, you know? Anyway, in this video, we're going to look at times the Autobots cross that line, starting with, okay, that's bad, but I can kind of understand it, ranging all the way up to 7th Circle of Hell levels of evil. Before we launch into it though, I'd love it if you hit like on the video and consider subscribing if you aren't already. It makes an absolutely huge difference to a shitty little channel like mine and ultimately means that I can spend more time making these silly little videos. Alright, plug over, let's get started with Impactor. Battle-hardened, harpoon-handed hard-ass, this guy's rep is huge. Now I'm not talking about the Decepticon that swapped sides in Siege, but in IDW's 2005 continuity, he was leader of the legendary Wreckers, and as such, had to get balls deep into the dirtiest parts of the war.
Great phrasing.
Thanks! And in Last Stand of the Wreckers, which was no picnic, the Wreckers' rivalry with Decepticon Squadron X came to a horrific end when they finally caught up with them and managed to round them up on planet Pova. Impactor's second-in-command and friend, Springer, was trapped under some collapsed rubble, to which Impactor proposed a very simple solution. I'll shoot you in the lower spine. Sorted, job's a good one. That's the kind of guy we're dealing with here. When Springer comes around, Impactor has them all rounded up and ready for transport off to a prison colony. But because the planet Pova has a neutrality status, it turns out that they weren't meant to be fighting there in the first place, and Impactor is ordered to let them go. Goddamn Prowl and his rules. So Impactor takes a blaster and executes each and every one of them one by one, while they're restrained and on their knees. Springer turned him into the authorities, at which point Impactor lay down his arms and handed himself in. And later, he gets put in the same situation with Overlord, and instead decides to bring him in instead of murdering him. So there's a little bit of redemption there, I guess. Now, you could try to justify this by looking at some of the horrific things that Squadron X did. For example, this guy has 4 Autobot insignia hanging around his neck, so at least 4 kills by himself. But the truth is that this is an action that lowers our guy here down to the level of the very thing he's meant to be fighting against. So I would say, horrific deed, but I can understand why he did it. Roadbuster did something that I find pretty awful, actually. The double hard, arm-to-the-teeth member of the Wreckers trained his cadets so hard, beating them and even killing them, actually, but he was under the influence of Tarantulas at the time, who had shrunk himself down and burrowed into his head. So I figure that poor Roadbuster can't be held accountable. And besides, justice was served when... this. Ugh. So I'm letting him in. What happened there? So I'm letting him off. Let me just get some of that blood. There was also the time that Ratchet blowtorched a Vehicon's face. One that was just trying to escape, no less. But he's all juiced on synth then, so not sure if you can hold him entirely accountable. Very grey area here. Let's move on, because we've got quite a few to get through. Let's talk about Brainstorm. Oh, he puts his pinky out while he's shooting. Cup of tea, cup of tea, cup of tea, cup of tea, cup of tea. Not necessarily evil, but definitely sus. This super smart scientist flyer was in charge of overseeing the approval process of more and more ridiculously brutal weapons at the Kima facility. He became a double agent, exchanging information with the Decepticons for components to build a time machine. In a briefcase. Which he originally intended to use to go back to save his love, but then figured he could go back and stop Megatron from starting the war in the first place. He was discovered when his duplicate, yeah, that's another long story, was killed by the DJD, and they found a Decepticon insignia on the underside of his mask. Once he was caught and put on trial, he argued that he never gave the Decepticons any information that was actually damaging. Plus, the fact that had he succeeded in rewriting the timeline, he himself would have ceased to exist, meaning that his actions were ultimately regarded as selfless in the end. I don't know. I still don't trust this guy. Sussy, sussy, sus, sus. Like, if this guy is capable of giving himself the power of God all in the name of love, what else is he capable of doing? Like, what if they have an argument? Oh, you found someone better than me. Well, let me just invent a cattle prod that explodes people's heads. So this guy gets a pass. Would someone keep an eye on him? Next up, I wanted to talk about Prowl. Now, Prowl is one murky dude, let me tell you. Devil-horned military strategist, lover of rules and logic over even conscience, uses any excuse to arrest Decepticons. This guy became embroiled in a Senate plan to lobotomize the members of the Decepticon movement. And yeah, I thought I'd open up strong, you know, there you go.
Lobotomy.
Where do I go from there? Well, just wait. At one point, he teamed up with Mesothelus, who was neutral at that stage and would later change his name to Tarantulas, to make a Decepticon, a weapon of mass destruction that annihilated the city of Carpessa, killing nearly 1,500 innocent neutrals. And because it was made with Decepticon components, the Decepticons got the blame, leading to every single survivor enlisting in the Autobot army. Win for Prowl, loss for all those innocents. Then he started realizing that Tarantulas might actually be a little bit too crazy, especially when it came to his use of the noise maze. Basically, Tarantulas would imprison bots in this pocket dimension where they were mentally destabilized by their surroundings. It sounds hellish. So how does he get rid of this nutty professor? Well, Prowl tried to get Impactor to send Tarantulas to the noise maze so he could destroy all of his barbaric creations. But luckily for Tarantulas, Impactor must have been in a forgiving mood that day, so he flipped him the bird.
You have one unheard message.
Yo, IP, didn't work out with Spider Guy. Might need you to kill me. You know what? Just call me back.
Message deleted.
At another point, he convinced Hot Rod to put Overlord on the Lost Lightship, where Overlord was kept in secret in a slow cell. But Brainstorm sabotaged the cell, which allowed the DJD to detect Overlord's signature, and the DJD showed up and massacred pretty much the whole crew just to get their target. Thanks, Prowl. Now, in his own defense, he would probably say something like he's defending Cybertron and you
can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs.
But, whew. Right here, I would probably talk about Farmer, but I did that in a previous video, so I'm going to keep it brief. But boiling it down, made a deal with Tarn whilst running the Delphi medical facility, which involved him providing the transformation cogs of dead bots in exchange for the DJD not attacking the facility. Over time, though, he figured, oh, I don't have to wait for them to die, I can give them a little nudge here and there, and started offing patients on purpose. Later, he developed a rust plague that he planned to unleash upon the planet and overwhelm the facility and bring about its closure, as he figured that this was his only way out of the predicament. He tried to shoot his former friend Ratchet in the back and sawed Ambulon in half with his chainsaw, which was part of this sadistic competition to see who could stitch patients who'd been cut in half back together again. Which, if that isn't horror movie enough for you, look at this. When he reduced poor Ratchet down to just his head and spark and tortured him. I mean, who wrote these comics, really? Verdict, put him on the express train to hell because he was one sick puppy. Sentinel Prime, leader of the Autobots before Optimus, gravelly voiced Sentinel, made a deal with Megatron to restore the glory days of Cybertron at any price. All of his evil deeds are seeded in a somewhat noble cause, as his love of his home planet is no doubt genuine. So he developed space bridge technology to bring Cybertron to Earth. You guys have probably all seen the movie, so I won't dwell on it, but in IDW's comics, he planned a false flag Decepticon attack that would give him an excuse to round up and brainwash a number of proto-Decepticons. On another occasion, he supercharged a space bridge to Cybertron, allowing a horde of reanimated Titan corpses to travel through the portal and destroy everything on Cybertron, leaving a blank slate on which he could rebuild his perfect Autobot society any way he saw fit, yeah. So my verdict, noble intentions, but that can't hope to justify all of this shit. Lock him up, put the key up his bottom. Oh, why didn't I go bot? Lock him up, put the key up his bot. So stupid. Right, enough of that. Get your serious faces on because we gotta talk about Getaway. Charming escapologist, but also narcissistic, treacherous madman. Strangely enough, occasionally it can happen that a spark, like the heart and life force of a transformer, as soon as it's born and put into a body, can be thrust straight into battle. And yeah, this is strange because although Cybertronians probably don't have to mature physically and emotionally like we do, as all that is kind of built into the spark, they still need time to get used to their body and have their spark and brain synced up. But sometimes out of desperation, there's no time for this. And yeah, they kick them straight in there and yeah, it's pretty harsh. Anyway, this is what happened to Getaway, and of course it left some psychological scarring on the poor Autobot. But that's only reason one why this guy is messed up. He also began to realize that he showed signs of affinity, which means that he is one of the very few that could potentially become the bearer of the matrix of leadership. So he developed this god complex and started to think he was special and got the idea that it was his God-given right, and every day that passed that he didn't inherit the matrix just fueled his bitterness and anger. And so he set about manipulating his way towards a huge mutiny, including the grooming of Tailgate to try and get him to sneak into Megatron's room and injecting him with a virus that would brainwash him. This was at the stage that Megatron was good and had joined the Autobots, which caused a lot of unrest among the Autobot ranks. Yeah, it's a long story that I'll get into more in my video about Shockwave, as it all kind of stems from there. But basically, Getaway stitched up poor Tailgate so that he would get caught. Luckily, Cyclonus intervened before Megatron crushed his head. Getaway was thrown in a jail so complex that even an expert escape artist like him couldn't escape. But he was freed by his mutineers, who then stranded Megatron and a group of Autobots, including Magnus and Hot Rod, on the Necro-Titan's planet to be executed by the DJD. Now, I think at this stage, most of the Autobots that had mutinied didn't actually know that Hot Rod and Magnus and the others were to die. I think they just thought they were being stranded there, and just as they were about to find this out and expose Getaway's treachery, he let loose Sunder from the brig as a distraction. And trust me, we'll get to Sunder later in this list. Sunder agreed to help, but only in exchange for 25 life cords for him to eat. Life cords basically being the central nervous systems of Autobots, I think. So Getaway and his closest accomplice, Atomizer, filled the ship's oil reservoir with scraplets that would strip 25 poor Autobots of their components, basically flesh if they were organic, so they could easily harvest the life cords. Horrific. And there's more. When his partner Atomizer started having doubts, saying that Getaway was officially taking things too far, Getaway forced him to execute a protector bot, using the logic that now Atomizer had gone too far as well. No going back now. Atomizer's conscience clearly wasn't settled, as he later came to the rescue of some Autobots that were being slaughtered by Starsaber, an act that Getaway punished by literally ripping Atomizer to shreds. Look at this carnage. Now, as horrific as all these acts have been, this is the one that made me think, oh, f me.
That's insane! That's insane!
That's insane.
Atomizer was Getaway's closest ally. Getaway eventually died in a confrontation with Hot Rod and Cyclonus when he gets both his arms cut off. Oh no, actually it's only one arm. Clip! When he gets one of his arms cut off, then, long story short, as he's dying, he sees Autobot God Primus, and thinking that his time has finally come to take up the mantle of Prime, his one wish finally fulfilled, well, this happens. And yeah, remember the scrap lists he'd used to kill the 25 Autobots earlier? They had interfaced with planet Meridy's systems, Meridy being this euthanasia planet that would give you blissful hallucinations as it in fact slowly killed you. So they gave him a vision of his heart's one true desire, and then strip the flesh from his bones. Metal flesh from his metal bones. You know what I mean. Now, weirdly enough, Getaway once stated that he never really wanted to kill anyone, that he would be happy having everyone live on cyber utopia in a paradise society under Getaway Prime, of course. Obey me, and we can all be happy, okay? I think he genuinely believed that as a Prime he could usher in an era of peace, and that end was worth all of these barbaric means, and his plan just got all horrifically twisted. I think the main thing that makes this extra horrific for me is that when you look at Overlord and Tarn, Sunder, they're quite clearly monsters. Look at them. But Getaway isn't. He's quite an unassuming looking bot, don't you think? And for someone who looks like that, to be capable of all these things is quite staggering. So as we saw before, the best of intentions don't matter a diddly when your actions are this twisted. So I'm saying this guy's scheming, manipulation, and treachery is heinous. Heinous with an H. Disgrace to the badge and irredeemable. And this atrociously painful death is exactly what he deserved. More scraplets. Pour on some more scraplets. More. Right here, we got to talk about Sunstreaker. I already talked about this guy in a previous vid, but this guy did a big backstab, so I reckon it's worth revisiting in a little more detail. So, while he was working on Earth, he was ambushed by the Machination. Machinations were this faction of humans who basically wanted technology. I'll go into them in a later vid. But just briefly, with the help of Scorponok, they painfully pulled Sunstreaker to pieces as they tried to create a series of Sunstreaker clones. And basically, in the escape, Sunstreaker ended up with one of the clones' heads instead of his own. From there, he began raiding labs across the country looking for his actual head, and long story short, this sparked a deep resentment towards humans.
Like a really, really deep resentment.
This in turn led him to making an under-the-table deal with Starscream, which involved Starscream killing Megatron, sending the Autobots back to Cybertron, with Starscream getting control of both the Decepticon faction and planet Earth. And Sunstreaker saw this as a great deal. He got to have all of the Autobots go back to Cybertron, but also he asked that Starscream exterminate every member of the human race. Thanks. From there, Starscream and Sunstreaker fed the Autobots disinformation and led them into an ambush, with the Autobots eventually being exiled and trapped on Cybertron, and Optimus caught in the blast of an exploding space bridge and put into stasis lock. The Autobots knew that they'd been betrayed and started ripping into each other trying to find out who did it. Sunstreaker siding with Ironhide and trying to pin the blame on poor Mirage, which culminated in Mirage almost being beaten to death by Ironhide at one point. Sunstreaker eventually confessed before sacrificing himself to protect the Autobots from an Insecticon swarm, and eventually he got back into the good books. But considering he put Prime in a coma, turned the Autobots on each other, nearly had Ironhide kill Mirage for no reason, and wanted the whole human race dead, and even though he had good reasons, there's no way you can justify these actions. Horrific. Now before things get dark, honorable mentions go to Optimus Prime for not bringing Raph his snowball.
But I will bring you back a snowball.
The kid's never seen snow, for God's sake! And while we're talking about snow, was it really that difficult to dig Skyfire out of the ice here? Like, what was it, 3 feet of ice? Then there was the time that the Autobots mind-controlled Devastator.
Yes, Optimus Prime, I obey.
But I'm fine with that. That's all part of the game, baby. B for public indecency. The Demolisher execution never really sat right with me. I mean, he's totally incapacitated here. He poses literally no threat. Within the first few pages of Last Bot Standing, Hot Rod has ripped the top of this innocent bot's head off. Although you gotta let that go because he was suffering from some kind of dementia at the time. Although dementia or no dementia, this guy is no less f***ed. But the one that I really wanted to mention honorably, if you know what I mean, was one that I saw posted somewhere, so all credit to the original poster. But in Secrets and Lies, it's explained how Optimus actually engineered the Ark crashing on Earth and being sealed away for millions of years. Also, it shows Shockwave flying in gun mode. Interesting. Basically, he wanted to lure Megatron away from Cybertron and trap him somewhere out of harm's way.
Why can't I fly in gun mode?
Thing is, though, that to make the trap convincing, he loaded up quite a few unknowing Autobots onto the Ark. Now, I haven't read this comic, so I don't know, but to me, it seems like this is Optimus committing a necessary evil rather than anything else, and sacrificing his own men probably tore him up inside. And as another commenter said, he actually stayed with his men, and he didn't abandon them, so you know, you make up your own mind.
All right, let's do this.
So this is one that will inspire joy feelings all round. Let's get on to the worst of the worst. And it's time to talk about Sunder. Sunder is essentially the Autobot Hannibal Lecter. Starting out as a nemosurgeon, nemosurgery being a kind of a mind meld, the patient giving the surgeon the ability to edit certain memories. Now this is a fascinating topic to me that I wish was explored more in sci-fi. Like if you could do this, you could alter who you are now, how happy you are as a person, etc. And you can definitely see how bots who have been surrounded by the atrocities of war for thousands of years might need to eternal sunshine themselves once in a while. Anyway, back to Sunder, he was able to access bots' memories without them even knowing. So of course he became the best nemosurgeon there was. Oh, you know me so well.
Just good at my job, I guess.
Anyway, somewhere in there, he lost his mind and went full Jeffrey Dahmer, becoming the murderer known as the Terahex Ripper, notorious for consuming the memories of his victims, feasting on their darkest secrets, as he put it. Even when caged, he proved to be dangerous by manipulating Freud into helping him, exploiting Freud's fascination with him, and allowing Freud to study him in exchange for bringing him fresh victims. So Freud probably deserves a place on this list too. What's especially chilling about this, though, is originally I thought there might have been some mind control going on here, but actually now I think that's not the case, and that Freud was a willing participant, somehow misguidedly thinking that he was helping to heal the mind of the twisted serial killer. Freud even removing Sunder's eyes to try and curb his urge to feed and kill. Why Freud wore Sunder's eyes around his neck though, I'll never know. As I mentioned earlier, when Getaway tried to use his mind control powers, "May I please borrow your crazy?" Sunder demanded 25 life cords to feast on, so it seems like his appetite for memories was only growing. If all that wasn't terrifying enough, he could also trap bots in a memory loop. I mean, imagine having to relive your absolute worst moments from your memories over and over and over again. But his most twisted ability was that he was able to trigger a bot's transformation after making them forget exactly how their transformation sequence worked, so the bot would effectively turn themselves inside out. Brutal. He later went on a rampage where he merged with the body of his dead brother Scepter to give him this enormous and fearsome body before he was eventually killed by the Omega Guardians. So in summary, manipulator, serial killer, cannibal, and straight up barbarian. Inflicted a fate worse than death on his victims, broke into bots' minds, ate their memories, trapped them in their own worst fears, before pulverizing and obliterating them, or, turning them inside out, whatever. And the sad truth is that even though this guy died, he will live on in our nightmares. And there you have it. And I, for one, might never look at that Autobot symbol in the same way again. Let me know if you can think of any more horrific deeds, and make sure you stay tuned to the channel. Coming up, I've got most powerful beings that aren't Decepticons or Autobots, most powerful combiners, and I've got some more monster stuff coming up too. Don't worry, monster fans, I haven't forgotten about you. So let me just say massive thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I have an absolute blast making these little things, and all your support means a hell of a lot to me. So thank you for coming on this silly little journey with me, and I will see you very soon for the next one.